A Mooney owner spent $95,000 on a plane with clean logs and a fresh annual. Then a regulation he never read, written by people he never elected, drew a line at 59 knots. His plane stalls at 60 knots. That single number just locked him out of the fastest growing buyer class in general aviation, while the airplane sitting 3 rows down in the same hangar inherited every one of those buyers. The 172 did not get faster. It did not get newer. The rulebook just redrew the fence, and the most produced airplane in history ended up on the winning side of it. How does that happen? And what does it mean for what a 172 is actually worth right now? A handshake, a wire transfer, and a signed bill of sale. Those are supposed to be the hard parts of buying an airplane. For one Mooney owner, that is how it went. He spent $95,000 on a clean M20J, every logbook in order, a fresh annual, and a performance envelope that would put most four-seaters to shame. The plan was to fly, maybe instruct, maybe sell in a few years to someone else who wanted speed on a budget. But the real risk was not in magnetos or corrosion. It was hiding in a line of type on the FAA Type Certificate Datasheet, VS1, clean stall speed, 60 knots calibrated, 1 knot over the new limit. The ink was barely dry on the sail when the FAA MOSAIC rule drew its line at 59. The paperwork did not care about the plane's condition, reputation, or the fact that it could be made to stall slower with aftermarket vortex generators. The rule said only the original type certificate value counts. No exceptions, no appeals, no asterisks for good maintenance or clever modifications. The Mooney's 60 knots calibrated airspeed is as fixed as the serial number on its data plate. 3 rows down in the same hangar, a Cessna 172 sits with a certified VS1 of 48 knots. It is slower, less glamorous, and in some ways less capable. But the paperwork says it qualifies. That means anyone with a sport pilot certificate and a driver's license medical can buy it, fly it, and insure it. No hoops, no medical exams, no bureaucratic dead ends. The Mooney, by contrast, is now invisible to this entire class of buyers. The difference is not in the airframe, it is in the paperwork. For the Mooney owner, the phone stopped ringing. Brokers offered less, or nothing at all. The value of his asset dropped, not because of a prop strike or a bad annual, but because of a number on a government form written by people he will never meet. The 59 knot line is not a safety margin. It is a market fence. And on the wrong side, even the best-kept Mooney is just another orphaned listing. The outrage is not that the 172 won. It is that the paperwork made it inevitable. So how exactly does a single knot, a decimal point on a type certificate, redraw the map for who can buy, fly, or finance an airplane? The answer is buried in the rulebook, and it starts with understanding what VS1 means and why the people who read the paperwork first are the ones who see the repricing coming before anyone else. The modernization of special airworthiness. Certification, MOSAIC, became law with a few lines in the Federal Register on July 24, 2025. The FAA's language is blunt. Any airplane with a certified clean stall speed, VS1, at or below 59 knots calibrated airspeed, as shown on the original type certificate datasheet, qualifies for sport pilot privileges. Not the number in a sales brochure, not what is painted on a placard, not what an aftermarket kit claims to achieve. The only figure that matters is the VS1 stamped in the FAA's own paperwork when the model was first certified. That is the number that draws the line. This is not a guideline or a suggestion. It is the new law of the land locked into 14 CFR section 61.316. The rule does not care about intent, only numbers. If the TCDS says 59 knots or less, the airplane is in. If it says 60, 61, or anything higher, the door is closed. No exceptions for modifications, no appeals for old paperwork, no credit for careful flying. The FAA's Advisory Circular, AC 61-146, issued October 20th, 2025, spells it out again. Eligibility is defined by the number on the original type certificate. That is the only figure the agency will recognize. The scale of this change is national. As of October 22, 2025, the first phase of MOSAIC went into effect. The FAA's own records show 887,519 active pilots in the United States. Of those, more than 500,000 are certificated but lack a current medical, meaning the buyer pool for any airplane that qualifies under this rule is instantly larger, and the market for those that miss by even one knot is instantly smaller. This is not a theoretical shift. It is a hard reset for who can buy, finance, or insure a legacy four-seat. The FAA's own registry analysis, released in response to a Freedom of Information request, counted just over 5,200 N-registered four-seat airplanes that meet the new VS1 threshold. That is about 3/4 of the US four-seat fleet, but the dividing line is absolute. An airplane with a certified stall speed of 59 knots or less is now accessible to every sport pilot and every private pilot flying on a driver's license medical. Anything over that number is invisible to this entire class of buyers, no matter how safe, how well maintained, or how desirable it was yesterday. The MOSAIC rule is not a subtle policy tweak. It is a national eligibility fence, drawn with a single number, enforced by the FAA's own paperwork, and immune to argument or workaround. For buyers, sellers, and owners, the only question that matters is what the type certificate says. Everything else is just noise. Walk down any ramp in America and you will see the same story. Rows of Bonanzas, Cirrus SR-22s, Arrows, Lances, Cherokees, Dakotas, each one a product of decades of engineering, pride, and steady demand. But with MOSAIC, the paperwork draws a line through all of them. The Bonanza G36, a six-figure traveling machine, sits at 62 knots VS1 on its type certificate. The SR-22, Cirrus's flagship, posts 62 or 63 knots depending on the generation. The Piper Arrow and Lance, 61 and 63 knots. The Cherokee 235 and the Dakota show 60.8 knots. Every one of these numbers is official, typed, stamped, and locked in by the FAA's own datasheets. Not a single one slips under the 59-knot barrier. For owners, it is not about flying technique or maintenance. It is about a number on a government form. The Bonanza owner who thought he would retire on the value of his G36 finds himself on the wrong side of a decimal point. The SR-22, a plane that outsold its competitors for years, is now boxed out by a stall speed that is 3 knots too high. The Arrow and Lance, mainstays in flight schools and family flying, are shut out by a certification figure set decades ago, long before anyone imagined a sport pilot could fly a four-seater. There is no appeal. The FAA's rulebook says only the original number matters. Aftermarket vortex generators, mods, or even factory service bulletins that could shave a knot or two off the stall speed are irrelevant. The only thing that counts is the VS1 as it appears on the type certificate. No one at Piper or Beechcraft or Cirrus gets to argue the case. The cutoff is absolute. The result is a market freeze for these models. Brokers who used to move Arrows and Cherokees to young instructors or aging private pilots now see those buyers evaporate overnight. The pool of eligible pilots shrinks, but the supply of airplanes does not. Prices soften, then sag. Insurance underwriters, watching the buyer pool dry up, raise premiums by double digits just to cover the risk. Parts suppliers, already stretched by long lead times, have no incentive to stockpile for an orphaned fleet. And for the owners, there is the sting of being blindsided. No accident, no airworthiness directive, no scandal, just a decimal point in a federal register. A Bonanza or SR-22 that was a blue-chip asset in September is a hard sell by November. The value did not vanish in the engine or the airframe. It leaked out through the paperwork. The kind of loss that does not show up in the logbooks, but hits just as hard when the next annual comes due and the phone stops ringing. This is what happens when the rulebook changes the map. The line is bureaucratic, but the consequences are real. Good airplanes locked out for being 1, 2, or 3 knots too fast on paper. And for the people who own them, the lesson is simple. In aviation, the most expensive number is sometimes the one you never see until it is too late. 48 knots. That is the number stamped on every Cessna 172 type certificate since the Eisenhower administration. Not 59, not 60, 48. It is not a claim, it is not a sales pitch, and it is not up for debate. The FAA paperwork says the 172 qualifies, and that is all the law requires. That single digit does more than clear a regulatory hurdle. It throws open the doors to the largest pool of buyers in American aviation. Start with the pilot pool. As of the latest FAA count, there are 503,000 pilots with a certificate but no current medical. That is more than half the active pilot population. The MOSAIC rule turns every one of them into a potential 172 buyer overnight, no medical exam required. The Mooney, the Bonanza, the SR-22, they are all locked out by a number. But the 172 sits on the right side of the fence, and the result is not just a bigger audience. It is a market with scale. Production numbers back it up. More than 44,000 Cessna 172s have rolled off the line since 1956. No other 4-seat airplane comes close. That matters when you are talking about liquidity and price stability. If a buyer wants a 172, they do not have to chase a rare serial number or hunt for parts on a forum. There is a ready supply, a deep support network, and a steady flow of used and new inventory. This is not about romance or nostalgia. It is about what happens when eligibility, availability, and demand line up on the same spreadsheet. But the real firewall against a price collapse is not just private buyers, it is the institutional floor. A TP flight school, the largest in the country, operates a fleet of 326 Cessna 172 Bousars. That is not a typo, 326. They have locked in orders for 40 more per year through 2027. Civil Air Patrol placed an order for 7 new 172s for 2026 alone. These are not hobbyists. They are organizations with budgets, insurance requirements, and a mandate to keep flying. When the MOSAIC rule landed, they did not have to change a thing. Their aircraft stayed eligible, their insurance stayed valid, and their procurement plans kept running. This is why the 172's value does not move with the whims of the weekend flyer or the latest magazine review. The demand is structural, propped up by the math of eligibility and the inertia of large-scale buyers who need a legal, insurable, and available platform. The paperwork does not care if the airplane is glamorous. It cares about the number stamped on the certificate and the size of the buyer pool. That is why the 172 stands alone on the right side of the 59-knot line. Not because it is the best airplane, but because the rulebook made it the one everyone can buy, fly, and finance. The rest is just market mechanics. Numbers don't care about nostalgia or loyalty. They measure what the rulebook actually did. By the end of October 2025, the average asking price for a used Cessna 172 across controller, trade A-plane, and aircraft blue book hit $183,435. That is a weighted mean, pulled from over 1,000 listings, with a range stretching from $46,000 for a tired 1960s airframe to $675,000 for a loaded G1000 NXI. The median price moved up nearly 3.5% in the first month after MOSAIC took effect. Over the next year, the overall upward trend doubled from its pre-rule pace, with prices rising close to 5% annually. Inventory tells the same story. Plane and Pilot's year-end report clocked a 17.75% drop in active 172 listings between September 2025 and September 2026. Owners who might have sold decided to hold, knowing the buyer pool had just ballooned. The supply of eligible airplanes tightened, and every one of those missing listings translated into another, rung up the price ladder. Insurance companies did not wait for the dust to settle. Underwriters raised premiums by an average of 18% for aircraft that missed the eligibility line. For a Bonanza or a Mooney, the annual bill sometimes jumped by thousands of dollars because the pool of insurable buyers shrank overnight. The 172, meanwhile, held its rate advantage, buoyed by a safety record that is hard to argue with. It records 0.56 fatal accidents per 100,000 flight hours, about a third of the general aviation average. That number is not just a comfort to pilots, it is a hard fact that actuaries use to set premiums and banks use to approve loans. E3 aviation trend reports show the same pattern: eligible aircraft appreciating and models locked out stagnating or dropping. The law did not make the 172 faster, cheaper to run, or more exciting. It made the airplane visible to a new class of buyers, and the market priced that in almost instantly. The value moved on paper before it moved in the air. That is the reality when a regulatory decimal point redraws the map, and the people who read the paperwork first are the ones who see the repricing before anyone else. July 24, 2026 is already circled on every serious buyer's calendar. That's when Phase 2 of the MOSAIC rollout takes effect, and the FAA strips out the old light sport aircraft definition for good. After that date, the only thing that matters for sport pilot eligibility is the number on the original type certificate. No more legacy exceptions, no more regulatory overlap. Anyone who is thinking about buying, selling, or holding a 4-seat airplane needs to act like a mechanic running a pre-buy inspection. Check the paperwork first, not the paint. Here is the checklist. Start with the type certificate datasheet for the exact serial number. Do not trust sales brochures, owner anecdotes, or even placards in the cockpit. The FAA's own paperwork is the only number that counts. If the VS1 is 59 knots calibrated or less, the airplane is eligible. If it is 60 or higher, walk away. No aftermarket kit, no service bulletin, no clever paperwork will change the FAA's mind. For models with production gaps, like from 1986 to 1996 Cessna 172 production, check that the serial number falls within a certified block. Some late-model airframes have subtle differences that can move the paperwork line by a knot or two. Next, review the maintenance records with an eye for regulatory compliance, not just airworthiness. An airplane that has been modified with vortex generators or wing extensions might fly slower, but unless the type certificate was amended at the factory, those changes do not count for MOSAIC. The FAA's July 2026 enforcement memo makes it clear. Eligibility is locked at the original certification, and any discrepancies will be flagged during ramp checks or insurance underwriting. Do not assume the current price premium for eligible aircraft will last forever. The FAA has already signaled that the 59-knot line could be revisited if accident data or international harmonization pressures change the rulebook again. For now, the only safe bet is to treat the paperwork as gospel and keep a clean audit trail. In a market built on regulatory lines, the difference between a blue-chip asset and a stranded listing is as thin as a single knot on a government form. Right now, the FAA's 59-knot paperwork line is repricing assets instantly. Planes above it, regardless of build or pedigree, lose access to new buyers. The 172 isn't better, it's just inside the fence. This is what happens when regulators pick a number and let the market do the rest. Read the rulebook before you read the sales pitch. Let me know what you're seeing out there in the comments.